Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Transformers TCG Deck Techs, where we dare to think outside the box and we have fun doing it. My name is Jimmy, and today I'm going to show you a deck that I won a recent tournament with. It revolves around a character that I've seen pop up a lot recently on Facebook and on YouTube. But before we get to the deck, if you find that you want to build this deck but you don't have all of the cards for this deck, check out topdecktcg.com. They have great prices on their singles, and if you use the promo code DeckTechs10, you'll get 10% off your entire order. So check out topdecktcg.com for your singles. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start looking at the characters, starting with the character that this deck revolves around, and that character is Blurr. He has an ability on his alt mode side that is absolutely fantastic. It reads, when this does attack damage to a tapped enemy while there's at least one untapped enemy, this untaps and attacks an untapped enemy. So being able to untap in this game is really powerful, especially when it's built into a character's ability. It's almost like having another character on your team. It's that powerful. And it's really the reason why Blurr is 12 stars, because if you look at his health is 10. That is extremely low for a 12 cost character. So when I was building this deck, I was trying to figure out if I wanted to go strictly orange to make Blurr's attack extremely high, or like I do, I love blue decks, and Pierce is a great strategy for blue decks. Well, of course, I love blue, like I said, so I went ahead and went the Pierce route. And the reason for that is because of that 10 health. You want to be able to protect Blurr for as long as possible, protect Blurr with armors that can grant tough or the like, but I went ahead and went with the Pierce route. His other side doesn't have an ability, but it does have 6 natural attack damage. So if you find that your opponent doesn't have any untapped characters, or if your opponent is down to their last character, you can go ahead and flip to this mode and get some extra attack damage that way. So when I was looking at all the cards, I found that a cars strategy was going to work best. And the first car that we're going to look at is Bumblebee from the starter set. He has an ability on the alt mode side that says when you flip to this mode, each of your characters gets Pierce 1 until end of turn. Now that's going to help Blurr out when he has certain upgrades on him that grant an additional damage to him. There's several upgrades and actions in this deck that will grant Pierce 3, and Blurr has a natural attack of 3, so if you have an additional Pierce, it's not going to do anything, but there are other upgrades in the deck that just grant +1 damage, so flipping to this mode is going to help quite a bit in that, when that happens. His other ability on his bot mode side says tough 1. So because this has a lot of blue in it, having that tough 1 is going to help Bumblebee survive a lot longer. And I want to protect Blurr for as long as possible, which means I kind of want my other characters to stick around for as long as possible. So that tough 1 is going to come into play quite a bit in this deck. Okay, so that's 2 cars, and we have 7 stars left to use on our team. And the last character is going to be Autobot Hot Rod. And the reason for that is because his alt mode ability also has tough 1. So in this deck, Hot Rod is going to stick around for a while. And there's also, with it being a cars deck, there's ways to untap my characters. And I really want to be attacking in with Hot Rod first, because I kind of want him to be knocked out first because of his bot mode ability. And his bot mode ability says, when this is in your KO area and you flip to this mode, do 1 damage to an enemy. So you're not going to be flipping a lot of characters with this deck. It's primarily going to be Bumblebee more often than not until we get Hot Rod into the KO area. And then you kind of have the choice between Bumblebee or Hot Rod depending on the situation. But if you're flipping Hot Rod while he's in the KO area, every other turn, he's going to be dealing 1 damage to somebody. This is going to help Blurr out quite a bit because there's going to be situations where you have an opposing character that's only at 1 health, and you kind of don't want to waste an attack into that character. So Hot Rod's really good for that. Okay, so that's the team. So we'll go ahead and start looking at the battle cards. And the first battle card that we're going to look at is an upgrade. And it's a weapon called Piercing Blaster. And it's a weapon that gives our character Pierce 3. And when I saw that Blurr had 3 natural attack, this was the first card that came to mind. I mean, giving him Pierce 3 means that all of his attack damage is going to be pretty much guaranteed. So this will also help our other characters as well, because they have natural attacks that are at least 3. They're both actually 4. So we can put this on any one of our characters. So I went ahead and put 3 copies of Piercing Blaster in the deck. The next card, which is also a weapon, is Noble's Blaster. And it has a blue icon, so that's going to help us out on defense, and a green icon, which will help us guarantee that it ends up in our hand. And it's put on Autobots only. All of our characters are Autobots, so we are good in that department. And it says while the upgraded character is attacking a Decepticon, it has Pierce 2. And it also gives our character +2 damage. So, if we're up against Decepticon decks, this is really going to come in handy for Blurr. It will also come in handy for, our other characters as well. Increasing their damage to 6 on both Bumblebee and on Hot Rod will help their damage output quite a bit. But because this has a green icon, I went ahead and just put 2 copies of Noble's Blaster in the deck. The next upgrade, which is also a weapon, is Energon Axe. And it has a blue icon, so it's going to help us on defense. And it says put on damaged characters only. It grants our character Pierce 2, and it gives our character +3 damage. So regardless of what the type of deck we're up against, this is going to help us out. The +3 damage is going to help against decks that, aren't really playing much defense. And the Pierce 2 is going to help us out against those decks that are playing defense. So because of how great this card is, I went ahead and put 3 copies of Energon Axe in the deck. The next upgrade is a utility, and that's Matrix of Leadership. It has an orange and a blue icon, so it's going to help us both on offense and on defense. It says put on Autobots only. Again, we're great in that department. And it says while this is on a leader, each of your other characters gets +1 damage and Pierce 1. It also gives the upgraded character +1 damage. But starter deck Bumblebee is a leader. So if we put this on Bumblebee, it's going to give Blurr, and Hot Rod of course, but it's going to give Blurr +1 damage and Pierce 1, which is basically giving Blurr +2 damage for the turn, for what he's doing. But we can go ahead and put this on any one of our characters, depending on the situation. So I went ahead and put 3 copies of Matrix of Leadership in the deck. Okay, so the next couple of upgrades are going to help us protect our characters. And the first one is Sparring Gear. And it has an orange icon, so that'll help us on offense. It has a green icon, so we could pretty much guarantee this will end up in our hand. And it's an armor that gives our characters tough 2. So, slapping this on Blurr is going to really help him stick around for a while. But putting this on either Hot Rod or Bumblebee is going to increase their tough to 3, which with all the blue that's in this deck, they are not going to be going anywhere anytime soon, typically. But because this has a green icon, I went ahead and just put 2 copies of Sparring Gear in the deck. The next card, which is exactly like Sparring Gear, except it has a blue icon, is Reinforced Plating. This is an armor that gives our character tough 2. So I'm putting 3 copies of this in the deck. That may seem like overkill because we already have 2 copies of Sparring Gear in the deck. But having 5 armors that grant tough 2 pretty much guarantees that we're going to be, giving our characters tough in this deck. The next upgrade, which is, the necessary evil of the upgrades, that's Handheld Blaster. It's a weapon that gives our character bold 1, but we're not going to be playing this as a upgrade unless, it's a dire situation and we don't have any weapons on our characters and we want to try to flip that extra orange because there are orange icons in this deck. But this is in here primarily for the 2 blue icons, and flipping those icons is really going to help us stick around. So I'm putting 3 copies of Handheld Blaster in the deck. The next card is a staple in all Cars decks, and that is Turbo Boosters. and it has an orange icon, and it says put on cards only, so we're going to be okay there. But when you put this on a character, untap that character, and it gives that character +1 damage. So this is the card that I was talking about earlier that will give Blurr +1 damage, but not any additional pierce. But being able to untap Blurr and letting him do what he does is fantastic. So, you know, you put this on Blurr, you flip Bumblebee back into car mode, and, you know, you're attacking with, you know, Pierce 4 if you have a piercing blaster on Blurr already. But because this works on all of our characters, we went and put 3 copies of Turbo Boosters in the deck. Okay, so that's all the upgrades. So we'll go ahead and look at the actions now. And the first one, which is the necessary evil of actions, is Security Checkpoint. And it's an action that says each player reveals their hand and scraps all upgrades from it. It also has 2 blue icons, which is why this is in the deck. There might be decks out there that you would want to play this against regardless of what you have in your hand. But again, you know, our upgrades are fairly important too. So this is in here, you know, just for the 2 blue icons primarily. But I went ahead and put 3 copies of Security Checkpoint in the deck. The next card is Heavy Handed. It's got a blue icon, and it's an action that says one of your characters gets +2 damage until end of turn. While this is attacking an enemy this turn that has fewer stars than it, it has Pierce 4. So, you know, this is in here for Blurr. There are many, many, many more characters that have less than 12 stars than have more than 12 stars. So, you know, you put this on Blurr, and it's going to stay there until after his second attack if he gets one, because it's until end of turn. This card is super powerful on Blurr, so I went ahead and put 3 copies of Heavy Handed in the deck. The next card is The Bigger They Are. It's very similar to Heavy Handed, but it reads one of your characters gets +2 damage till end of turn. While it's attacking an enemy this turn that has more stars than it, it gets Pierce 4. So there's going to be those situations where Blurr is going to be going up against characters that have 13 stars, or, you know, it might be going up against Metroplex or Omega Supreme or some combiners. But of course, you know, if you're going up against a combiner, he's not going to trigger his ability because the combiner's pretty much going to be the only character that's going to be on the table. There might be a couple situations where they aren't, like if you're playing against a Dreadwing deck, or if you're playing against a Dinobot deck that's trying to use Sludge, but Sludge isn't probably going to be there. So, you know, this is primarily for the little guys in our deck. But because of how strong it is, we went ahead and put 3 copies of The Bigger They Are in the deck. Now, the next card is very similar to both of those, but it doesn't grant any additional damage, and that's Surprise Attack. It's got a white icon, and it says one of your characters gets Pierce 3 until end of turn. So, you know, while this doesn't grant us any additional attack damage, this kind of acts as another playset of Piercing Blaster. If you slap this on Blurr, you know, he has enough attack damage to get the full, you know, Pierce 3. But this can also be used on our other characters too. So I went ahead and put 3 copies of Surprise Attack in the deck. The next card, which is also a staple in almost all card decks, is Start Your Engines. And it reads, flip each of your characters from bot mode to car mode, then untap one of your cars. So untapping Blurr, again, is very powerful in this deck. But this flips all of your, you know, bot mode characters to car mode. So if you have Bumblebee in bot mode, Blurr's going to get an additional Pierce 1. So being able to untap is the primary function of this card, but you know, it works in a lot of situations. So we went ahead and put 3 copies of Start Your Engines in the deck. And the last card is Rollout. And it has a blue and an orange icon, so it's going to help us both on defense and on offense. But it says flip each of your characters from bot mode to alt mode. So this is going to be used if Blurr is untapped and Bumblebee is in bot mode. That'll help, you know, get Blurr that additional Pierce. It may not seem like it's a big deal to give Blurr that additional Pierce, but you'll find if you play this deck that there's a lot of times where you want to get that additional Pierce because you have that 1 additional damage on Blurr. But because this has both an orange and a blue icon, I went ahead and put 3 copies of Rollout in the deck. Okay, guys, so that is the deck. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. This deck placed first in the tournament that I played in. I actually went up against a couple of Insecticon decks, and I honestly think I got pretty lucky against those decks, but it was surprising how well this deck actually performed against those top-tier offensive decks. But primarily, I had a lot of fun playing this deck. It's enjoyable to, see how the cards interact with one another. Being able to untap multiple times in a game is pretty fun. But I just really enjoyed playing the deck. So like and subscribe, and don't forget, you can win if you dare. So take care.